In May of 2024, a high school history teacher in Beijing stood in front of a classroom of teenagers and said three things. He said Donald Trump was going to win the American presidential election that November. He said the United States and Israel were going to start a war with Iran. And he said when that war came, the United States was going to lose it. At the time, nobody outside that classroom cared. It was a lecture, a recording uploaded to a small YouTube channel with a few thousand subscribers, about as consequential as a weather forecast. Nobody watched. Then the first prediction came true. Then, over a year later, the second one did too. And within days, a name almost nobody in the West had ever heard of was suddenly everywhere. Tucker Carlson's studio, Stephen Bartlett's podcast, timelines and group chats and comment sections across 3 continents, all repeating the same 4 words. China's Nostradamus called it. Here's what should stop you before we go any further, though. Because the story you're expecting right now is a story about whether this man is right, whether he's some kind of secret genius reading tea leaves that the rest of us can't see. That is not this story. This is a story about you, about why a claim like his, 3 sentences spoken in a classroom, by someone with no formal training in the field he was making sweeping claims about, was able to travel further and faster than almost anything else on the internet this year. Because the answer to that question has almost nothing to do with geopolitics, and almost everything to do with what your brain does, automatically, without your permission, whenever the world starts to feel like it's spinning too fast to hold on to. Let's start with the man, because you need the shape of him before you can see the pattern underneath. His name is Jiang Xueqin. He was born in Guangdong in southern China and left as a child when his family emigrated to Canada after the Cultural Revolution. It was not a soft landing. His father, who had been a teacher back in China, found work in Toronto as a short-order cook. His mother worked as a seamstress. By his own account, Jiang grew up wearing second-hand clothes, one of those kids who understood early that the ground under a family's feet can move without warning, a lesson, it turns out, that will matter more to this story than anything about game theory or geopolitics. He eventually made his way to some genuinely prestigious institutions, an undergraduate degree from Yale, a stint as a researcher, not faculty, at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, a fellowship from Britain's Royal Society of Arts, and at some point, somewhere between all of that and a teaching post at a high school in Beijing, he started calling himself Professor Jiang. Here's the detail almost nobody watching his viral clips seems to know, and it's worth sitting with before we go any further. He isn't one, not in any formal sense. His actual academic credential is an undergraduate degree in English literature. The professor is not a title any university conferred on him. It's a title he adopted. And I want to be precise about why that detail matters, because it would be easy to make this into a simple story about a fraud. It's not that simple, because the strange thing about Jiang's rise isn't that he lied about a credential. Plenty of people inflate a bio and nobody notices. The strange thing is that the credential barely mattered at all to the people who made him famous. What mattered was something else entirely. Picture the videos, if you haven't seen them. A middle-aged man in a plain polo shirt, standing at a whiteboard, drawing maps with a marker, talking in the unhurried cadence of someone explaining something to a classroom that already trusts him. He uses phrases like game theory. He says things like, all the world is governed by rules and incentives. Once you understand the rules and incentives, you can predict how people behave. Now, here's a question worth pausing on. Does that sentence actually tell you anything? Read it again. Understand the rules and incentives, and you can predict behavior. It sounds like a key that unlocks the future. It is, if you actually examine it, almost content-free, the kind of statement that's true of literally every complex system on Earth and therefore predicts nothing about any particular one. And yet, delivered in that calm whiteboard professor cadence, it doesn't feel empty. It feels like wisdom. This is where the story stops being about Jiang Xueqin specifically and starts being about something psychologists have been documenting for decades, in contexts that have nothing to do with geopolitics at all. There's a phenomenon researchers call illusory pattern perception, the tendency of the human brain, under conditions of uncertainty and threat, to start seeing order and causality in places where the actual evidence is thin or even absent. It's the same mechanism behind people seeing faces in clouds or feeling certain their lucky socks help them win a game. Under normal, stable conditions, most of us catch ourselves doing this and laugh it off. But researchers have found something important. When people feel like they've lost control over their environment, economically, politically, physically, that instinct doesn't go away. It gets stronger, much stronger. The less control you feel you have over what happens to you, the more your brain reaches for anyone who sounds like they understand the machinery underneath it all. And 2024 into 2026, if you were paying any attention to the news at all, was not exactly a stable, controlled feeling stretch of human history. War in multiple regions, currency anxiety, AI moving fast enough that even the people building it seemed unsettled by their own creation. Into that exact atmosphere walked a calm man with a whiteboard and a marker, offering something that felt like an explanation. But here's the part of the story that should actually bother you more than the credential question. Because Jiang didn't make one prediction. He made three, and only two of them, so far, have come anywhere close to true. You almost never hear about the third one. Every single introduction to Jiang, across every podcast, follows the same script, almost word for word. He called the Trump win, he called the Iran war, and then it moves on. The third prediction, the one about how that war would ultimately end, remains contested, unresolved, and quietly absent from most of the coverage celebrating him. This is not an accident of storytelling. It's a second, equally well-documented psychological pattern, and it has a name too: confirmation bias, expressed through selective memory. Human beings are provably worse at remembering misses than hits. A stopped clock is right twice a day, and somehow we are wired to remember exactly those two moments and forget the other 713. There's a wrinkle here that makes this particular case even more interesting, and it's worth being honest about, because it undercuts the prophet framing even further. Several journalists who've looked closely at Jiang's predictions have pointed out something specific. By the time he made his 2024 election forecast, prediction markets like Polymarket, real money betting platforms where thousands of traders stake their own cash on political outcomes, were already pricing Trump's odds of winning well above even. Jiang, by his own admission in several interviews, references these markets directly in building his forecasts, which raises an uncomfortable question underneath the mystique. Was this a man seeing the future, or a man reading a number that was already sitting in public view and repackaging it in the voice of prophecy? Neither answer, notice, requires you to take a side on Iran, or Trump, or China's strategic interests. That's deliberately not where this is going, because the actual, most important question isn't whether his predictions were right. It's why we, collectively, want so badly for someone to be able to make them, and why we're willing to overlook the gaps once we've decided they can. Let's go somewhere else for a second, because this pattern is much older than YouTube. In the 2nd century, a Greek satirist named Lucian wrote an entire essay mocking a religious con artist named Alexander of Abonotichus, who built a wildly profitable prophecy business around a fake talking snake and vague, flattering predictions delivered to anxious pilgrims. 2,000 years later, in the depths of the Great Depression, a Detroit radio priest named Father Coughlin drew tens of millions of listeners a week. At the time, one of the largest broadcast audiences in American history, by explaining with total confidence exactly who was to blame for the chaos and exactly what was coming next. In every single one of these stories, separated by centuries and continents and technology, the pattern is identical. A period of genuine, disorienting uncertainty, followed by the sudden mass embrace of a single, calm, confident voice, claiming to see the shape of what's coming. The one variable that changes generation to generation is just the format of the whiteboard. So why does this keep happening? Not to a handful of gullible outliers, but provably to smart, educated people, again and again throughout recorded history. Here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, because the honest answer implicates the audience, not just the performer. Living with real uncertainty is exhausting. Not knowing whether the next few years bring stability or collapse is a heavier psychological weight than most people can carry comfortably for long. And a confident voice, even a wrong one, even a fabricated one, offers something enormously valuable in exchange for very little: relief. For the length of a 20-minute video, you get to stop holding the full weight of not knowing. Someone else is holding it for you. That trade is so psychologically appealing that, given the choice between an honest, nobody actually knows, and a confident, charismatic, I know exactly what happens next, a very large percentage of human beings will choose the second option almost every time, even when some part of them suspects it isn't true. This is also, worth saying plainly, exactly the mechanism that has powered cult leaders, financial gurus promising guaranteed returns, and self-help influencers selling 5-step programs to fix your entire life. The content changes. The psychological transaction underneath it does not. And here is the detail that makes Jiang's specific case almost unbearably ironic, if you sit with it for a second. Go back to where we started. A boy in Toronto, watching his father go from teacher to short-order cook almost overnight, learning early that the ground can disappear without warning. Whatever else is true or false about his predictions, that origin story maps with strange precision onto the exact psychological need he now serves for millions of strangers. He is, in some sense, selling the one thing he never had as a child, the feeling that someone, somewhere, actually understands the rules well enough to see the floor shift before it happens. Whether that makes him a cynical performer or a true believer selling himself the same story he's selling everyone else is a question I genuinely can't answer for you, and I'd be lying if I claimed I could. What I can tell you with real confidence is this: the next time you feel that specific magnetic pull towards someone speaking with total certainty about an uncertain future, a market call, a health claim, a political forecast, anything, the smart move isn't to ask whether they sound convincing. Almost everyone who's good at this sounds convincing. That's the entire craft. The smart move is to ask a much smaller, much more honest question. What, specifically, have they gotten wrong, and how loudly are they saying it? If you can't answer that question about someone you currently trust, that itself is the answer. Uncertainty isn't going anywhere. If anything, most of the honest forecasters, the ones who hedge, who say probably, who admit the limits of what anyone can actually know, will tell you it's going to keep increasing for the foreseeable future. Which means the market for people willing to sound certain in exchange for your attention isn't going anywhere either. The whiteboard will keep changing. The marker color, the platform, the accent, the specific crisis of the decade, all of that is just costume. The mechanism underneath it is the same one that filled Roman temples and Depression-era radios, and, this year, a high school teacher's YouTube channel. And it will keep working on all of us for exactly as long as not knowing what happens next remains harder to sit with than being told a comforting lie about it. That's really the only prediction in this entire story I'm willing to make with confidence. If this one made you think differently about the next confident voice you come across, subscribe, because next week we're opening a very different kind of file. A mind that actually did understand the universe better than almost anyone alive, and still couldn't see the one person standing closest to him.